The latest updates from Iran and the investigation into attempted terror attacks in New York City. We're bringing you a breakdown of some of the big gun-grabbing attempts going on in the state of Virginia. And then lastly, a very juicy scandal brewing in California. Not around Gavin Newsom, but around his wife. All of that and so much more today on 10 Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
Yesterday, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth announced that it was going to be our most heated day of fighting yet in Iran.
Today will be, yet again, our most intense day of strikes inside Iran.
President Trump made huge news on Monday when he talked about how the United States was far ahead of what they had planned for up to this point, meaning that the fighting could be done sooner than anyone had expected. And one thing that's been noticed on the ground is a major reduction in missiles flying out of Iran.
We are seeing far fewer missiles. It was actually a 10-hour lull in launches overnight as the Iranians are having trouble getting off large barrages.
Meanwhile, a new supreme leader of Iran has been selected. Mojtaba Khamenei. Notable that the cardboard version of him was put in place so that he wouldn't get bombed. Meanwhile, the weekend's oil spike seems to have dissipated quite drastically now that President Trump and his administration are working on reassuring everybody that the Strait of Hormuz is on its way to being back to full normal activity. Yesterday, we talked about the attempted terror attack in New York City, and we also talked a little bit about some of the strange media handling of it. Well, yesterday, it got even a little bit weirder with this tweet from CNN. 2 Pennsylvania teenagers crossed into New York City Saturday morning for what could have been a normal day, enjoying the city during abnormally warm weather. But in less than an hour, their lives would drastically change, as the pair would be arrested for throwing homemade bombs during an anti-Muslim protest outside of Mayor Zohran Mamdani's home. Here's what we know so far. Now, that was a pretty strange tweet. For those of you who are familiar with Seinfeld, this is called the yada yada. 2 men crossed a bridge, yada yada. They were arrested for trying to bomb and blow up people. One scary dynamic that we're seeing here, and we saw it first with Zohran Mamdani, which we covered yesterday, but Governor Kathy Hochul has also followed suit. From New York Post, Hochul blames both anti-Muslim protest and ISIS-inspired bomb throwers after Gracie Mansion attack. These potential attackers had talked about how they wanted their attack to be bigger than the Boston bombing. They wanted to carry out terrorism and kill people with very, very dangerous bombs that blow shrapnel, and anyone who doesn't die on impact will have permanent injuries to it. And yet, people like Kathy Hochul want to talk about the protest. You can't have prominent, powerful elected officials arguing that there is a First Amendment limit to free speech when you're concerned about offending radical Islamic terrorists. That goes against everything we believe in. We've extensively covered Virginia's race to the far left with all sorts of radical proposals. One thing I wanted to dig into a little bit today, because it's incredibly timely, is a number of massive gun control bills making their way to the governor's desk. This from the NRA. Virginia residents, anti-gun politicians in Richmond have sent 4 gun control bills to the governor of Virginia's desk. Tell Governor Spanberger to veto these attacks on your Second Amendment rights. Now, there are 3 bills there that I wanted to particularly highlight because these go much further than just what you might hear of trying to ban or limit certain controversial weapons. These are the types of bills that can make normal law-abiding citizens like myself criminals overnight, because their larger goal is to simply make gun ownership illegal by subversion. Here's those bills. Senate Bill 727. Banning or carrying many types of common firearms on public property. That includes any kind of magazine over 10 rounds, guns that have threaded barrels to accept suppressors, and more. So again, some are interpreting this to mean that if you have a gun with a magazine of over 10 rounds, which most commonly owned home defense handguns have magazines over 10 rounds. I have multiple guns with magazines over 10 rounds. Taking them out, for example, if you drive to the gun range, having them out in any kind of public space or transporting them is suddenly illegal. Again, even for people that are incredibly law-abiding. Here's another one. Senate Bill 27 and House Bill 21 sets up the ability for anti-gun groups to sue gun makers for crimes committed by criminals. This is one that has gotten a lot of attention because the left and the sort of anti-gun movement's larger strategy has been, if they sue gun manufacturers for crimes committed by criminals, they can eventually bankrupt the entire industry. It's not very different than what we've seen with climate groups trying to sue oil and gas companies for climate change. But it is very radical, and it will have major ramifications for how we understand law in America. But one of the sponsors of that first bill that we talked about spoke on this. This is Bangladeshi-born Virginia Senator Saddam Aslan Salim.
And I know the frustration we all feel when it seems like our government isn't doing anything to stop them besides offering thoughts and prayers.
So there he's basically reciting the anti-gun movement's talking points about thoughts and prayers, which I've always thought were very vapid. But he also, in his tweet, listed and linked to the left-wing dark money groups that have been funding any Democrat willing to do their bidding. But another thing I wanted to show you is Democrat leader Scott Surreville trying to describe these guns on the floor of the legislature.
If you have an assault pistol, if you want to have one of these pistols with a silencer on it and a pistol grip in the front.
Now, I would note there, assault pistol is not a thing. Normally, if assault is attached to the name of a gun or any kind of gun, you would expect it to be an automatic weapon, which has been banned in the United States now for a very long time. But what Democrats have learned is they can scare people into supporting them if they come up with unique constructions to try and scare people about guns that are otherwise very commonly owned, like the guns with magazines over 10 rounds that Scott Surreville is trying to ban right now. My thesis is you should not be able to ban anything if you can't adequately describe what it is and if you don't know what the basic words around it are. But the person who said this even far better than I could is John Comerford of the NRA.
These are things that turn law-abiding citizens into felons overnight in many aspects. Keep in mind, gun owners are one of the most law-abiding segments of the populace across the country and certainly across Virginia. And what are we doing? We're focusing on those individuals and not the criminals that need to be put behind bars. And as you can hear with somebody who can't even explain what they're doing in the most basic sense, that's who's writing the laws.
This month marks the 2-year anniversary of the bizarre collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. This from my friend Logan Dobson. The 2-year anniversary of the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse is this month. Not a single foot of new bridge has been constructed, but the budget has doubled and the opening has already pushed back to 2030. If that sounds familiar, we may have found that Maryland Governor Wes Moore has his own version of Gavin Newsom's high-speed rail. But another interesting flap to this from Mary Catherine Ham. Moore used the aftermath of the bridge collapse as his speech opener at the Democratic National Convention in 2024, an example of his and Kamala's commitment to governance.
Phone calls that I got that morning started with these 3 words. Gov, it's Kamala. She said, I know you spoke to the president, and I want you to know we are here with you every step of the way.
Yikes. So again, that's the state of the bridge right now. Not a single foot has been added to it. So when Kamala says, hey, Gov, I'm with you every step of the way, that is a pretty perfect representation of Kamala Harris and Democrat leadership in actually finishing projects. We talk quite a bit about Gavin Newsom on this program. For one, he's preparing to run for president, so he's going to be in the news quite a bit. For two, as a Californian, I love that state and I'm sad to see what he's done with it. But for three, he's the best example of failures of governance we've seen in modern history. But today, we're not talking about Gavin. We're talking about his wife, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, and a story in the New York Post that's turning a lot of heads. Gavin Newsom's wife pushed weird gender films into California classrooms while paying herself a fortune. Now, this story is incredibly juicy. First things first, she paid herself a salary of $300,000, which a Daily Mail investigation found is 95% more than workers at similar-sized nonprofits. I see 3 major red flags with this story. First, the fact that she's making $300,000 off of this nonprofit. I think that that's notable that, again, it is 95% more than people at similar nonprofits. 2, this nonprofit gets funding from a lot of corporations that have active lobbying business in front of her husband, the governor. And so they're giving money to Jennifer to get favors from Gavin. That is a huge problem. But the third piece that's a really big problem here is the fact that California public schools have paid a lot of money to Jennifer Newsom and her nonprofit for the privilege of showing these very weird documentaries. This also from the New York Post. What's more, Newsom's own Department of Education shilled his wife's documentaries in official state guidelines after the Representation Project bragged in a 2014 tax filing that its films and curricula were used in 1,000 California public schools. So Gavin Newsom is using his position as the governor to promote his wife's documentary using official resources through the California Department of Education, enriching his own households. But we also really need to talk about some of these very weird documentaries that are being shown to school children in California. First, The Great American Lie is a documentary film that examines how a U.S. value system built on the extreme masculine ideals of money, power, and control has glorified individualism, institutionalized inequality, and undermined the ability of most Americans to achieve the American dream.
Your privilege is actually built on my oppression.
That clip is a good tell that this documentary is highly focused on politically charged racial issues, but also the left-wing attack on things like individualism, which America was founded on, but we've seen more and more Democrats from Zoran Mamdani to Jennifer Newsom here talk about individualism as a bad thing. But another one of her documentaries got an even more controversial story. From CBS News, parents upset film with explicit images and language shown in Stanislaus County School. Now, this is another story about toxic masculinity called The Mask You Live In, and in it, there's a lot of discussion about sexual themes. This from the New York Post. Siebel Newsom's films have been screened in school districts such as Campbell Union and Stanislaus County, where some parents were reportedly outraged after an uncensored version of The Mask You Live In showing profanity and references to pornography was mistakenly shown to middle schoolers. Yikes, so not only are your kids getting a political indoctrination, but middle schoolers are being shown pornographic images. And I looked this up on IMDb's Parents Guide, and it said this: The Mask You Live In receives a severe rating for adult themes. And again, this was shown to middle schoolers. So Gavin Newsom might not be the only person out there hurting Gavin Newsom's chances. For our You Can't Make It Up segment today, we previewed this a little bit yesterday. Now, if we wanted, we could have James Talarico star in our funny You Can't Make It Up segments every single day. One challenge for Talarico is, like many millennials, he believes that everything he says is worth recording and is incredibly poignant. And so he has created so many very valuable little snippets of video like this.
Something that you love that's not family or friends.
I love, I'm just saying this because it's on my mind, the trans children.
Now, if Republicans were trying to cook up a perfect Democrat candidate to run against, especially in a state like Texas, it would look a lot like James Talarico, who is basically Pete Buttigieg if he was a youth pastor at a summer camp. But it gets even better. Here's this one on how he describes women.
For a woman to be able to control her own body, or any one of our neighbors with the uterus to be able to control their own body.
Now, I kind of imagine that's probably exactly how Pete Buttigieg also describes women. But one troubling aspect of so many of Talarico's craziest statements is that he's made them in churches. For example, this one.
You can't call yourself a Christian and destroy God's creation with greenhouse gases.
Now again, this guy's running in Texas, the home of Landman, where the oil and gas industry employs hundreds of thousands of people. So I hope that everyone gets a chance to see some of these comments. But the one we want to close with today is one of my personal favorites.
Yeah. No need to sit and cry over, your whiteness or your masculinity.
No, I particularly love that because looking at Talarico, he's someone that I can absolutely imagine sitting down and occasionally crying over his whiteness and masculinity. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us on 10 Minute Drill. Please leave us a review, like, subscribe, tell your friends, and we will see you tomorrow.